Two scientists specialized in the study of DNA were attempting to create one of the greatest inventions in the history of humanity. They were trying to create organic life. After several failed attempts, these particles did not evolve and disintegrated a few days later. Disappointed and unable to make progress, they decided to abandon the project. The experiment ended up in the largest landfill in America, where it spent several days and began to mix with toxic waste from the site. It also mixed with expired milk, and the bacteria it contained began to fuse with the experiment. That same night, a strong storm hit, and a massive lightning bolt struck the experiment. Immediately, millions of life particles began to form, developing and feeding on the garbage. Over time, these particles began to take shape due to the abundance of waste. In a single day, this microparticle had evolved at a surprising rate. The humanoid shaped mass of garbage had the ability to think and reason, though it still had the mentality of a child. Over the next few weeks, it fed on the landfill and grew rapidly. CROO is the name of this creature. One day, while he was roaming the landfill, two small mice approached him, fleeing from a cat. He observed as the cat caught one of the mice, and the other mouse hid behind CROO. As the cat finished eating the small mouse, CROO detached a part of his body to rub on the surviving mouse and immediately covered it with garbage. After a few minutes, the small mouse transformed into a much larger creature than the cat because the garbage made it grow quickly. It then launched itself at the cat and killed it. CROO called the mouse, which approached him, and he absorbed it without knowing that it would make him even bigger. He grew rapidly, and within 2 months, his mentality had become much more developed. Several days later, some men who had come to the landfill to dispose of more waste spotted the garbage creature. They felt disgust and fear, so they began to throw objects at it. However, the creature launched itself at them and managed to overpower the men, covering them in a sticky substance to turn them into its allies. The contamination rapidly spread through the bodies of these men, and in no time, they became part of this creature. As it detached parts of its body to create new allies, it became smaller, but that wasn't a problem due to the abundant trash in the area, allowing it to regain its size. Moreover, it had acquired more creatures for its army by taking control of dogs, cats, and rats that lived in the landfill. After several days of feeding on garbage and taking control of new lives, CROO had a small army that obeyed his every command. With a sizable and more developed group, they attempted to leave the landfill and head toward the city. Police officers at the scene, who were investigating the disappearance of recyclers, tried to confront these contaminated creatures that were rapidly emerging from the landfills, not allowing the agents to defend themselves fully. The commander and other officers in their vehicle watched as these creatures savagely contaminated their colleagues. They began to shoot, managing to kill those creatures, except for CROO, who started to flee the scene by entering the sewers. He managed to get far enough away and reached a seaport, where he boarded a fishing boat headed for an uncertain destination. Once there, he remained hidden for a while and understood what had happened to his allies. He realized that he needed to grow and take control of many more lives to be able to fight against humans. The agents decided to take the dead creatures for examination to understand what they were. After several tests, they discovered that these were animals covered in garbage, and their bodies were infected with a foul-smelling greenish substance. They also found that the contamination mass covering their bodies fed rapidly and grew significantly with each waste. They believed this was the entire threat and that they had it under control, so they incinerated the bodies and forgot about the problem. As time passed, CROO intelligence increased and he grew in size, and his goal was to visit all the places in the world and take control of new allies. Meanwhile, in England, there was a young man named John who dreamt of having great adventure in his life. He was at home, bored of watching TV, so he decided to go for a walk in the forest. He grabbed his backpack, some food, and set out in search of an adventure. He walked for a long while in the direction of the forest. He spotted a large river and decided to swim for a while. While swimming, he saw something shining at the bottom and dived to retrieve it. When he emerged from the water, He realized it was a very strange stone with an elaborate symbol. The stone started to shine even brighter and levitate in the air. The sky darkened, and a strong wind blew. And then the stone entered John's body, and his entire body began to transform into water. John didn't understand what was happening. He felt strange and fearful, unable to control his body. But then a white deer appeared, approaching him and explaining that he needed to help nature combat the growing pollution. Nature had granted him a special power with which he would confront this threatening issue to biodiversity. The deer taught him to control his body and communicate with marine animals to address the extensive pollution that had already spread. He soon realized it wouldn't be an easy task, given the abundance of waste worldwide, such as garbage-filled islands, oil spills, chemical spills into the sea, and more. However, he felt very excited about the new adventure that was just beginning. He learned a lot, and Mother Nature guided him throughout this new journey.
In Mexico, there lived a young man named Kevin who came from a low-income family as a member of a large family. Despite the poverty, he found great happiness in life and enjoyed nature. He felt a deep affection for the land where he was born. However, as he grew up, he witnessed how pollution was destroying his natural surroundings due to overpopulation. The rivers and crops in the area began to dry up, which saddened him because he made a living from farming the land. One day, while playing near a volcano, he felt the earth shaking. He approached to see what it was and found a very strange floating stone. He quickly grabbed it and kept it in his pocket because he heard other young people approaching the area. These were some boys who often bothered him and asked what he had in his pocket. Kevin didn't want to tell them, so they struck him. The stone slipped from his pocket and fell behind him. Kevin tried to retrieve it, but the boys hit him again, and he fell backward onto the stone. The earth trembled once more, and the sky darkened for a moment as Kevin screamed while he saw his body engulfed in flames. His entire body was covered in fire, and the other boys were frightened and ran away while Kevin continued to transform. He had obtained the power of fire. After several minutes, he became accustomed to his new body. The white deer appeared and approached him, telling him about his mission to combat pollution. It explained his new powers, how to use them, and why he had been chosen. Kevin felt great joy and decided to help Mother Nature confront the growing pollution that had taken over various living creatures, which were destroying the crops and homes of the people in the village where he was born. He began to confront them, possessing tremendous power, and he could fly. He could shoot flames from his hands and burn the contaminated creatures that were not as strong. However, as the days went by, he faced larger and faster monsters, so he had to continually improve his technique to keep up with the enemy.
In another location, deep in the jungles of Brazil, there was a beautiful and intelligent young woman named Tammy who wanted to help combat the pollution on the planet caused by deforestation in her birthplace. Large oil companies had been established there, destroying wildlife, which deeply saddened her. One day, while walking in the jungle, she spotted a beautiful white deer and began to follow it, drawn by the sound it made. She walked for a long time without knowing where she was, and she lost sight of the deer. She was momentarily alone and felt fear, but then the white deer approached her and told her not to be afraid, that it knew her intentions to help nature. It handed her a stone with unusual green inscriptions, and she accepted it. The stone entered her body, beginning to transform her into earth. Tammy understood that she had an important mission. She quickly learned to control her powers and began to fight the contamination that had taken over some of the local animals, including bears, jaguars, tigers, wild boars, snakes, and even some humans who worked in the oil companies and had been contaminated by CROO, further devastating the area. With the help of the animals that had not yet been contaminated, Tammy fought to defend the Amazon rainforest from the growing pollution. She possessed magnificent powers bestowed upon her by Mother Nature with the intention of saving the planet from destruction.
In China, a similar story was unfolding with a young woman named Crystal who had always been troubled by the high levels of environmental pollution in her country. More than once a week, the residents of her country had to wear masks due to excessive environmental pollution. However, she loved her country deeply and participated in campaigns against major polluting companies to reduce the amount of chemicals released into the sky. One day, while Crystal was in her apartment in a huge building, she felt everything starting to move. She thought it was an earthquake and hurriedly left the building. However, she was the only one in a panic. The other people in the building hadn't felt anything. She couldn't understand what was happening and decided to go to the park to relax, thinking she might be stressed from studying too much. While near a lake, she saw a reflection of a great white deer and immediately began to follow the reflection around the lake. When she looked up, she saw the deer right in front of her, and she was startled. She stood
Okay.
still for a moment until the deer broke the silence and began to speak to her. She couldn't believe what was happening and thought she might have gone mad due to stress. But then the great deer spoke to her about her mission, asking if she would help Mother Nature combat the growing pollution on the planet. She gladly accepted the offer as she was drawn to help fight environmental pollution. The deer gave her a transparent stone with a wind emblem, and the power of the wind entered Crystal's body. For a moment, everything around her spun. Deer explained her mission and then disappeared into the park's lake. In the following days, Crystal began to combat cruise pollution, which had spread to the birds in the sky and the toxic clouds due to excess chemicals. Crystal's mission was to combat pollution in the skies, and she had adopted the power of the wind.
Meanwhile, CROO had already visited many countries worldwide and had a numerous army of contaminated living beings who obeyed his every command. However, due to their large numbers, they were discovered by humans who took drastic measures to combat the growing pollution. They began to attack the contaminated creatures, but these were incredibly strong and resilient. They were led by humans who had been contaminated, allowing them to plan their attacks against humans. These creatures possessed the qualities of living beings, but were more resilient, faster, and could take over new life forms simply by detaching a part of their contaminated bodies, transforming other beings into pollution within minutes. They could also use weapons, vehicles, and anything they wanted. They started to invade entire cities. However, he knew it still wasn't enough to defeat the humans. He needed to take control of more creatures, so he decided to gather his army in a small European country. He planned the attack carefully to take over the inhabitants of that region. It was relatively easy due to the large number of allies he had. But he was well aware that this was just the beginning, and there were much larger and more challenging countries to conquer. He started with the smaller ones, as he had acquired extensive knowledge about humanity from living in their trash, giving him a deep understanding of their habits, actions, and way of life on this planet. This knowledge allowed him to collect valuable information about his enemy due to his accelerated reasoning capabilities. As the days went by, the four chosen ones fought pollution with all their might. However, increasingly larger, stronger, and numerous creatures began to appear, making the situation more complicated for them. They realized the severity of the issue when they learned that pollution had already spread to other countries. They had to act quickly before this threat completely expanded. Feeling that the situation was even more dire than initially thought, Mother Nature began to gather the chosen ones one by one and led them to the heart of the jungle, guarded by slumbering giants in the mountains. The landscape was stunning, with a grand waterfall where animals peacefully drank water and many fruit trees. The white deer led the chosen ones to a cave where Mother Nature resided. Once they had all gathered, they were thanked for their efforts in helping the planet. The four chosen ones met each other and felt great joy knowing they were not fighting alone. They were filled with courage and enthusiasm for the great mission that lay ahead. Before leaving, Mother Nature bestowed new powers and abilities upon them, teaching them how to combine their powers with other elements. Water and earth, wind and fire. They combined their powers, making them even more potent. Everyone was excited to see their new abilities. Mother Nature then began to tell them about CROO, the main problem they had to deal with if they wanted to stop the growing pollution once and for all. They devised a plan to eradicate pollution. Before they left Mother Nature's abode, a new member appeared as swiftly as a lightning strike. She introduced Jerry, who possessed the power of thunder. He had many years of experience with this power and would help the other elements. They needed all the help they could get, and the animals would also assist in the fight against this threat. The leaders of the major countries convened to discuss the escalating pollution problem. While analyzing the main causes of the problem, conflicts arose, with accusations against the larger countries for nuclear pollution and excessive toxic contamination. They couldn't reach an agreement to combat this threat, and decided that each country would have to solve its own problem. CROO had started to infect medium-sized countries, covering them with pollution and taking over new life forms. All these creatures fed on garbage, and with large quantities available, it made it much easier for CROO to multiply the number of allies. He had taught the contaminated humans to absorb smaller contaminated creatures to double their size and achieve an advantage in battles. Larger monsters, the size of cars, like cats and dogs, began to appear, terrifying helpless cities. CROO's plan was proceeding perfectly. He moved from one place to another in an airplane with a small group of allies, visiting the leaders he had appointed in each country to take the contaminated creatures to larger countries to help in the conquest of new cities. The four kids' elements made their way to CROO's location, where he was in a city in Asia, gaining new allies while discussing the invasion of powerful countries with one of his generals. They were also planning a strategy to infiltrate these countries, since they didn't have many allies there. They would have to execute a new plan to invade without being detected and achieve a surprise victory. The general mentioned a group of people who were willing to piloting large planes to attack the primary threats posed by human soldiers. CROO smiled and instructed the general to find these individuals. However, the general also warned that humans had fast aircraft capable of easily intercepting enemy ships. CROO think for a moment and once again smiled. He told the general that he would send hundreds of planes and ships across all borders loaded with contaminated creatures simultaneously. As he was finalizing his plan, he heard an explosion from the outside of the city where he was. He approached the window and spotted the white deer in the distance. He then ordered his creatures to intercept them while he observed the site of the explosion. CROO contaminated one pigeon, and within minutes, the pigeon grew in size. CROO climbed onto the pigeon and watched from the air as the intruders attacked the contaminated creatures. He felt curious about the white deer, who was observing the four kids' elements from a mountain, fighting against the pollution creatures. CROO stealthily approached from the sky, jumped, and caught the deer. The deer tried to break free, but CROO had already covered a significant portion of its body with contamination. He then mounted the pigeon and flew away after ordering the deer to attack the four kids' elements. CROO paid little attention to his enemies. He needed a plan for the invasion, so he departed from the scene. While the four kids' elements fought against the contaminated creatures on their way to the building where they believed CROO was hiding, they encountered numerous enemies. The four kids' elements combined their powers to defeat the pollution quickly. As they got closer to the building, The white deer intercepted the four kids' elements and began to attack them. Due to most of his body being covered in contamination, they didn't recognize their friend at first. Jerry, appearing like lightning, joined them to assist in the final showdown. Upon seeing his contaminated friend, the white stag, Jerry decided to carry him to Mother Nature to save him from further contamination. The elements continued toward the building, where they engaged in combat against large creatures and humans who were guarding it. These enemies were armed and posed a significant challenge. Nevertheless, by facing these adversaries, the four kids' elements improved their powers and learned to dominate them. They continued ascending the building and reached the top floor, only to find that CROO had already fled the scene. Realizing this, Jerry quickly brought the white stag back to Mother Nature's habitat. She examined the deer, using her abilities to purify him from contamination and heal his body. She blended the essence of a red plant and yellow flowers to create a powerful antidote, which she applied to the stag. After a few minutes, the contamination that covered his body began to recede, and he was saved from its grasp. Mother Nature then ordered her assistants to prepare plenty of hot water to aid in the purification process. With the stag's health stabilized, Mother Nature instructed Jerry to go back and guide the four kids' elements to cross new location. CROO was at an airport on the borders of the target. He had taken over the neighboring country with hundreds of contaminated creatures under his command. He loaded the most creatures onto the planes. Initially, he sent 10 planes to gauge the enemy's preparedness. Out of the 10 planes, only one succeeded in hitting the target. After a few minutes, he sent hundreds more planes. Meanwhile, he was getting ready to board the plane along with his group of generals. Just as he was about to board the plane, the four elements arrived to prevent the plane from taking off. Thought of their friend, the white deer, and the planet they lived on. CROO ordered his generals to continue with the mission, and he disembarked from the plane, heading toward the four kids' elements. When the plane reached a high altitude, a thunderclap struck the plane, causing it to descend rapidly. It was Jerry the Zap element, preparing for battle. So they found the strength and courage to fight back against CROO. Together, as if they were one, they began to attack, slightly injuring the enemy. Then they attacked again with greater force and managed to bring him down. The other contaminated creatures nearby began to approach and merge with CROO, who immediately grew to the size of a building. He was powerful and massive. They tried to attack CROO, but he was too large, and their powers had little effect on him. Then he cornered Sammy the Earth element, and her friends couldn't save her as they were severely injured. But then a massive earthquake shook the ground, and the distant footsteps of a giant could be heard. It was one of the Mother Nature's dormant giants that had awakened. A bright light drew the elements toward the giant. CROO couldn't understand what was happening. He had studied the living beings that inhabited the planet, but didn't anticipate this new foe. The four elements moved toward the giant and merged with him, giving him a completely different appearance. This giant possessed the powers of all four elements, making it a powerful ally for the four chosen ones. They could now face CROO. When CROO lunged at the giant, the elements quickly unleashed their powers simultaneously, causing severe damage to the enemy. Despite their numbers and danger, Mother Nature had sent other giants to assist the humans, who were on the brink of succumbing to contamination. For a moment, CROO was cornered and began to reason. He achieved complete control over his powers, allowing him to disintegrate and reintegrate himself at will, thanks to his anger and the situation he was in. Things took a turn for the worse for the elements, as their attacks no longer had any effect, making it seemingly impossible to defeat CROO. Then, John, the water element, also felt cornered and without hope. He concentrated intensely, developing his powers further. He transformed water from a liquid to a solid, managing to freeze a part of CROO. They struck him with all their might, producing a surprising effect, injuring CROO, who became very angry. He lunged at his adversaries, but John managed to make his powers gaseous, allowing him to disperse like a breeze and evade CROO's attack. He once again froze CROO, and, working together, they delivered a final blow, rendering him unconscious. His body began to shrink in size, and they captured him, sealing him in the giant's belly, which had a prison specifically for him. There, he would remain frozen forever. After defeating CROO, the five elements breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that it was all over. Humans understood that it was not good to pollute their shared home and worked together to clean up the mess caused by contamination. They were still in time to save their planet. It took several years to completely clean the Earth and assist the uncontaminated animals. From that point forward, they pledged to care for the planet as if it were their home.